In the Wild West, cowboys rode horses, except Eli Turner. He rode a towering gray donkey named Jasper, faster than a bullet, smarter than any outlaw, and about to face the deadliest gang in the frontier. What happened next would turn them into a legend you'll never forget. The late afternoon sun in Tombstone, Arizona, had a way of making the whole town look like it was carved from fire. It bled across the weathered wood of the boardwalks, clung to the dust hanging in the air, and turned the faces of strangers into gold-lit masks. The wind carried the scent of sagebrush and gun oil, mingling with the low rumble of boots on timber planks and the sharp clink of spurs. Tombstone had seen men come and go, miners, drifters, lawmen, killers, and it had a way of swallowing their stories whole. But on that day, the town saw something it would never forget. Eli Turner rode in slow, like a shadow the desert had decided to release. His hat brim cast his face in shade, his eyes scanning every doorway, every open window, every man too still on a porch. There was something about him, a stillness edged with danger, that made people stop what they were doing. But it wasn't just Eli that made the townsfolk pause mid-step. It was what he was riding. Not a stallion. Not even a half-wild Mustang. No, Eli Turner rode a donkey, a towering, broad-shouldered steel-gray animal whose long ears twitched like antennae for trouble. And this donkey didn't shuffle with the weary gait of a pack beast. It walked like it had read the street's history and decided it owned the next chapter. The animal's name was Jasper, though most in Tombstone would soon call him something else after they saw what he could do. Eli didn't smile, didn't tip his hat, didn't acknowledge the whispers that followed. But Jasper did. He turned his head toward a whiskey-soaked gambler leaning in a doorway, eyes narrowing as though sizing him up. The man laughed, spat, and called out, "Hey, cowboy, your horse shrink in the wash." Without breaking stride, Jasper veered close, clamped his teeth on the gambler's felt hat, and flicked it clean into the water trough. Laughter burst from the boardwalk. Eli kept riding a ghost of a smirk, passing his lips. Inside the Crystal Palace saloon, the air was a mix of cigar smoke, liquor, and unspoken threats. Eli took a corner table, ordered coffee, and said nothing. The piano man played low. The card tables were alive with muttered curses and clinking coins. Conversations ebbed and flowed until one word cut through the hum black spurs. The name drifted from table to table like a rattlesnake's hiss. A gang born somewhere on the edge of nowhere, who left nothing but ash behind. They rode without warning, killed without hesitation, and had been spotted weeks ago near Santa Fe. In Deadwood, they burned a ranch with a family still inside. In the canyons outside Prescott, they left 3 men hanging from cottonwoods. No one knew where they'd strike next, but everyone knew it was coming. Eli listened without looking up. Trouble had a scent, and this one was already in the wind. Jasper, tethered outside, stomped once, as though he'd heard the name too. That's when he saw her. She came in through the saloon side door, not with the sway of a barmaid, but with the measured caution of someone entering enemy territory. Her dress was travel-worn, the hem brushing the dust on the floor. Her hair was pulled back, but loose strands clung to her face, framing eyes that didn't miss a thing. They moved over the room quick, but deliberate, like she was counting exits and weighing threats. She wasn't here to drink. She was looking for something or someone. When her gaze landed on Eli, it stayed for half a second longer than it should have, and in that fraction of a moment something passed between them, not recognition, not yet, but a current strong enough to jolt him out of his stillness. She didn't smile, she didn't nod. She simply moved on, disappearing through the back before the door swung shut. Eli sat there, coffee cooling in his hand, and felt the room shift. He'd spent years drifting across this unforgiving land, letting other people's troubles pass him by. But something in the way she looked at him, something in the way she vanished, pulled at him like a hook buried deep. The piano man kept playing. The gamblers kept losing. The air kept smelling of cigar smoke and spilled whiskey. But outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the dry scent of far-off rain and the promise of something coming, something dangerous. Jasper's ears twitched again. He turned his head toward the horizon, and for the first time in months, Eli felt it too. The road ahead wasn't going to be the kind you survived by keeping your head down. This was going to be different. This was going to be trouble worth meeting head-on. And somewhere beyond the sunburnt streets of Tombstone in the shadow of canyons, and under the cold light of desert stars, the black spurs were already riding. The heat in Red Rock Canyon didn't just sit on your shoulders, it pressed down, seeped into your bones, and made the air itself feel heavy. The sandstone walls rose like the walls of some ancient fortress, their crimson faces glowing in the late morning sun. Somewhere far above, a hawk traced lazy circles against the pale sky. Eli Turner rode in silence, his eyes on the narrow trail that twisted between the canyon walls. Jasper's hooves struck a steady rhythm on the rock, the sound echoing back like a drumbeat. They had left Tombstone behind without ceremony. Eli had no destination in mind except away. But trouble has a way of finding a man, especially one who doesn't go looking for it. That morning, the canyon seemed empty until it wasn't. The voices came first, harsh, low bouncing between the stone walls in a way that made it hard to place their direction. Eli reined Jasper to a stop and tilted his head listening. The tone was unmistakable, the slow drawl of men who think they own the ground they stand on. Jasper's ears pricked forward. Moving without sound, Eli slid from the saddle and led Jasper toward the noise. The trail curved, and there, half hidden in the shadow of a rock face, stood Clara May. She was pressed back against the stone, a swaddled infant clutched tight in her arms. Her eyes were wide but steady, fixed on the three men closing in. They wore black spurred boots, their hats pulled low. One of them had a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "You've had your chance, miss," he said, voice oily, with false patience. "Hand over the papers, and no one gets hurt." Clara didn't move. Her grip tightened on the child. The second man stepped closer, his hand resting casually on the butt of his revolver. Eli knew that kind of casual. It was the kind that could turn deadly before a word was finished. He was reaching for his own gun when Jasper moved. The donkey let out a bray so sharp it cracked against the canyon walls like a rifle shot. The men jerked around startled and saw nothing but a wall of gray muscle and dust charging straight for them. Jasper hit the first one like a battering ram, sending him sprawling into the dirt. Eli stepped into the chaos, his Colt already drawn. "Move," he barked at Clara, and she didn't hesitate. She turned and ran toward Jasper, who wheeled around to block the second man's line of sight. Eli's shot rang out, striking the ground inches from the third man's boots, a warning that didn't need repeating. Clara swung herself up onto Jasper's back, the baby pressed tight against her chest. Eli vaulted up behind her, his arm steadying her as he spurred Jasper forward. Bullets cracked through the air, pinging off rock, but Jasper was already weaving down a side trail Eli hadn't even seen. The donkey moved like water, slipping through gaps barely wide enough for his bulk, skidding down loose shale, then bursting out into the blinding sun of the open canyon floor. The black spurs followed their curses, chasing after them. One shot came close enough for Eli to feel the heat of it past his ear. Jasper didn't falter. He cut across a dry creek bed, his hooves splashing through what little water remained. The sound of pursuit began to fade as the canyon walls swallowed the outlaws' shouts. Only when they had put miles between themselves and the canyon did Eli slow Jasper to a walk. Clara was breathing hard, but her arms around the child never loosened. She glanced back the way they had come, then forward, her expression caught somewhere between fear and determination. "They won't stop," she said quietly. "They want my family's ranch. There's more to it than land my father left gold hidden there enough to start over. They know it's there." Eli didn't answer right away. The trail ahead stretched toward the horizon, shimmering in the heat. Jasper flicked an ear, as if waiting for him to speak. "You know the way to Santa Fe?" Eli asked. Clara nodded. "Then we ride," he said, "but we'll do it my way." There was a long moment where they just sat in the heat and the silence, the only sound the wind stirring the dry grass. Finally, Jasper started forward on his own ears, twitching his stride steady and sure. Eli let him lead. He'd learned long ago that Jasper had a sense for more than just the trail. He seemed to know when danger was behind them and when it was waiting up ahead. As the canyon walls faded into the distance, the air cooled slightly and the light shifted. The sun was sinking toward the west, stretching the shadows long across the land. Eli kept his eyes moving, scanning the ridges and the sky. Somewhere out there, the black spurs were regrouping. Somewhere out there, the road was already setting its next trap. But for now, they were alive. And as long as Jasper's hooves kept striking the earth, they still had a fighting chance. The land between Red Rock Canyon and Santa Fe stretched out in a vast, unforgiving tapestry of dust, mesquite, and sky so wide it could make a man feel small enough to vanish. Eli Turner had ridden this kind of country before long, punishing stretches where the days baked you under a relentless sun and the nights cut you to the bone with cold. But now there was Clara May riding behind him on Jasper the baby, swaddled in her arms, and each mile carried a weight he hadn't felt in years. This wasn't just about reaching the next town. It was about outrunning the black spurs, and Eli knew that kind of enemy didn't quit. By the third day, their canteens were light, and the horizon offered no promise of water. Clara said little, though the worry in her eyes betrayed her glancing down at the baby more often than at the trail. Jasper's pace never faltered, but Eli could feel the heat radiating off his gray coat, the steady pull of his breath. Still, the donkey's ears were pricked forward, searching, listening. Late that afternoon, Jasper veered off the trail without waiting for Eli's command. The animal cut across a patch of sun-bleached grass toward a cluster of boulders. At first, Eli thought he was chasing shade, but then he heard the faint trickle of water. Behind the rocks lay a spring so small it could be missed if you weren't looking for it, a clear pool hidden away in the folds of stone. Clara slid down first, kneeling to cup water into her hands, before holding it to the baby's lips. Eli filled their canteens while Jasper drank deeply, ears twitching in quiet satisfaction. They camped there that night, the moon rising cold and white over the plain. Clara sat near the fire, her shawl drawn tight, the baby sleeping against her. She watched Eli as he cleaned his colt by the firelight, the metal gleaming in quick flashes. "You've done this before," she said quietly. Eli didn't look up, ridden with trouble chasing me more times than I'd like to count. "That's not what I mean," she said. "You've fought men like them before." There was a pause. "During the war," Eli said finally, "I fought men who thought they could take what they wanted, because no one would stop them. Lost a ranch to men like that while I was away fighting. Came home to nothing but burned posts and a cold fire pit." Clara's gaze softened, though her voice stayed steady. "Then you know why I can't let them have ours." The fire cracked, sending a spiral of sparks into the dark. Neither spoke for a long while after that. 2 days later, they rolled into Dodge City, a town that looked like it had been thrown together in a hurry and then left to bake in the sun. The main street was a mix of saloons, gambling halls, and the kind of shops that sold everything from rifles to wedding rings. Dodge was rough around the edges, a place where lawmen and outlaws often drank at the same bar. Eli wanted to pass through quickly, but trouble had a way of finding them. Near sundown, as they led Jasper down an alley toward the livery stable, shadows detached themselves from the walls. 3 men stepped out, their hats low, their hands easy on their gun belts. The gleam of black spurs caught the dying light. Turner, one of them, drawled his voice, carrying that false friendliness Eli recognized. "We've been looking for you." Jasper shifted ears back, a low bray rumbling in his throat. Eli didn't move, didn't speak, just measured the space between them, the weight of the Colt at his hip. The first man reached for his gun. It never cleared the holster. Jasper lunged, slamming his shoulder into the man's chest and sending him sprawling. Eli's Colt barked, once the bullet striking the dirt inches from the second man's boots. The third man drew and fired in the same heartbeat, but the shot went wide as Jasper spun his hind legs, flashing out in a kick that connected with the gunman's wrist. The pistol clattered to the ground. Eli didn't wait for them to recover. "Mount up," he told Clara, and within moments they were back on the main street, Jasper moving at a gallop that seemed impossible for a donkey his size. The townsfolk turned to watch as they thundered past dust rising in their wake. They made camp that night in the lee of a ridge where the wind sighed over the rocks. Clara fed the baby, her hand steady despite the day's close call. Jasper stood nearby, ears turning with every sound, his dark eyes glinting in the firelight. In the quiet, Clara spoke again. "My father's gold, it's enough to rebuild, to make the ranch strong again. But if they get it, they'll use it to tear apart more lives. I think that's why they want it as much as the land." Eli didn't answer right away. He thought of the burned posts of his own ranch, the way the wind had moved through the emptiness where his home once stood. Finally, he said, "Then we'll see to it they never get their hands on it." The trail ahead was long, and the black spurs were still out there, but the promise in Eli's voice was more than just a vow to protect her. It was the sound of a man who had found something worth fighting for again. Jasper, standing in the shadows beyond the fire, flicked an ear and watched the horizon. The road to Santa Fe lay waiting, and so did the reckoning that would come with it. Santa Fe was a city of contrasts, sun-warmed adobe walls, and cool shaded courtyards, the quiet murmur of markets mixing with the ringing of church bells. But when Eli Turner, Clara May, and Jasper rode into the plaza, they could feel a tension running through the place like a wire drawn tight. People moved quickly, avoiding eye contact, and on the steps of the courthouse a sheet of paper flapped in the wind. Clara reined Jasper to a stop and tore it free. The words were simple, stamped in official ink: "Property of the Black Spurs by legal claim." Her hands tightened on the paper until it crumpled. "They've already staked it," she said, her voice low. "They're here." It didn't take long to see how deeply the gang had set their hooks. Men in black spurred boots leaned against door frames, their pistols visible, and their smiles slow and mean. Merchants lowered their eyes when they passed. A few townsfolk still looked defiant, but most carried the kind of fear that came from living too long under someone else's thumb. Eli knew a fight was coming. You didn't move a wolf off a carcass by asking politely. That night, while Clara stayed with friends, she trusted Eli walked the town's edges, knocking on doors where he'd been told men still kept rifles oiled and ready. He found an old lawman whose badge was tarnished, but whose aim was still sharp. He found ranchers who had lost cattle to the spurs and wanted payback. He found a pair of Pueblo hunters who remembered the gang's cruelty on the trail and were willing to lend their bows. The plan took shape in whispers. They couldn't face the spurs head-on in the open. They'd be outnumbered and outgunned. But Santa Fe's streets were narrow, and its adobe walls could hide more than shadows. They would turn the town itself into a trap. Dawn came with a chill in the air. The Black Spurs rode in from the north, their leader, Calder Voss, at the front. He was a tall man with a scar running from temple to jaw, the kind who liked to let silence speak for him until it was time to pull the trigger. He dismounted in the plaza, his men spreading out behind him. "Bring me the girl," he called, his voice carrying over the cobblestones. "Bring her and the papers, and we'll be on our way. Refuse, and I'll burn this town to the ground." From the balcony above the trading post, Eli's voice cut through the air. Funny thing about threats, Voss. They only work if the other man's afraid. Gunfire erupted, echoing between the walls. From alleys and rooftops, Eli's allies struck rifles, barking arrows, hissing through the morning light. Jasper charged down a side street, driving a herd of half-broken horses straight into the spur's flank. The animals reared and scattered, throwing riders into the dust. Eli moved through the chaos with practiced precision, never staying in one place long enough to be pinned. He saw Clara in the doorway of the old mission, holding the baby close, but standing tall, her eyes locked on the fight. She wasn't running this time. Voss tried to rally his men, but the trap had closed too tight. Every corner turned into another ambush, every open space a kill zone. Jasper barreled past Eli, ears, flat teeth, bared, chasing down a gunman who had taken aim at Clara. The donkey hit him with a shoulder that sent both man and weapon skidding across the dirt. When the dust began to settle, the plaza was littered with the wounded and the disarmed. Calder Voss stood in the center, his revolver empty, his eyes narrow with hate. Eli walked toward him, Colt steady in his hand. "This is her land." Eli said, his voice low but carrying. "You've got two choices, leave it standing or be buried in it." Voss looked around, saw no help left, and spat into the dust. "You'll wish you'd killed me, Turner," maybe Eli said, "but you'll wish you'd never set foot here." The townsfolk dragged Voss and the surviving Spurs out under guard. There would be no quick hanging. Santa Fe had its own way of dealing with men like that, and none of it was merciful. By the time the sun reached its height, the plaza was theirs again. Merchants began reopening their stalls. Children emerged from hiding, and Clara stood in the center, the crumpled legal notice in her hand. She tore it in half, then in half again, letting the pieces fall to the cobblestones. Eli watched her, feeling the tension in his chest ease for the first time in weeks. The fight had been won, but he knew the West didn't give happy endings easily. What they'd taken back today would have to be guarded tomorrow and the day after, and as long as men like the Black Spurs existed. Jasper stood nearby, sides heaving, but eyes bright as if he understood the victory. A boy from the crowd ran up to him with an apple, and Jasper took it gently, chewing, slow his ears, finally relaxing in the warm Santa Fe sun. Eli holstered his Colt. For now, the land was safe. But he also knew that in the Wild West, peace was just the quiet before the next storm. And when that storm came, Clara, and Jasper would be ready. The weeks after the battle in Santa Fe carried a strange kind of quiet, the kind that felt both unfamiliar and earned. The streets that once seemed tense and watchful now hummed with the sound of life, returning merchants calling out their wares, children chasing one another between adobe walls, the bells of San Miguel Chapel tolling steady in the afternoon sun. For Clara May, it was the sound of home beginning to breathe again. For Eli Turner, it was something else entirely. He had not meant to stay. Men like him were built for the road, for horizons that never stopped stretching. But every morning he woke to the sight of Clara working alongside the ranch hands, the baby strapped to her back. And every morning it felt less like a place he was passing through, and more like a place he belonged. The ranch itself bore the scars of what had come before. Fences were broken, the barn roof sagged, and the south pasture was still bare from years of neglect. But the soil was good, and the water from the well ran clear. Clara had neighbors who came with tool seeds and strong backs, eager to see the land thrive again. Eli joined them without a word, his hands blistering from the work, in the first week his muscles remembering the rhythm of building something that might last. Even Jasper seemed to take to the life watching the activity from a shady patch near the barn, occasionally wandering over to supervise with a nudge or a bray, as if reminding them who had really saved the place. In the evenings after the work was done, the three of them would walk the fence line. The air was cooler then, and the light fell soft over the land, turning the grass to gold. Clara would tell Eli about her father, how he had come west with nothing but a wagon and a dream, how he had built the ranch from bare ground. Eli would listen, sometimes sharing pieces of his own past in return, the smell of his family's place before the war, the sound of cattle lowing at dawn, the laughter of his younger brother now long gone. These were not stories he had spoken in years, and he found that telling them here didn't hurt the way it once had. When spring came in full, the ranch looked alive again. New fence posts stood straight against the sky, the barn wore a fresh coat of red paint, and the pastures were dotted with grazing cattle. It was then that Clara spoke of a wedding. She did not say it with shyness, nor did she try to make it a grand affair. It was simply the next step in what they had already begun building together. Eli, a man who had outrun commitments for most of his life, found himself saying yes before she had even finished the question. The ceremony took place under the cottonwoods by the river, where the water moved slow and clear over smooth stones. Friends from the town came along with the neighbors who had helped rebuild. The baby, now more curious than quiet, fussed in Clara's arms until Jasper ambled up to stand beside them, wearing a garland of wildflowers looped around his neck. When the vows were spoken, someone swore they saw Jasper give a solemn nod, as if approving of the arrangement. Afterward, there was music and food spread across long tables in the yard. Stories of the battle with the black spurs were told and retold each time with more flourish, until Jasper was credited with feats so daring they bordered on the impossible. Eli didn't bother to correct them. Legends had their place, and Jasper had earned his. In the days that followed, life settled into a rhythm. Eli rose before sunrise to check the herd, worked the land through the heat of the day, and in the evenings he sat on the porch with Clara, the baby, between them, watching the sky turn to fire and then fade to deep blue. He no longer felt the pull of the open road like he once had. The restlessness that had carried him from town to town for years had been replaced by something steadier, something that looked like peace. Jasper, too, had found his place. He was given the run of a lush pasture behind the barn, where apple trees dropped their fruit in the fall, and the grass stayed green through most of the year. Visitors came often bringing treats or just hoping to catch sight of the donkey who had outsmarted and outrun a gang of killers. Children would press their small hands against his flank eyes wide with awe, while Jasper accepted their offerings with the dignity of a king receiving tribute. Yet, sometimes in the cool of the evening, Eli would spot him standing at the far fence, ears forward, gaze fixed on the horizon. He knew that look. It was the same one Eli had carried for years, the look of someone who still heard the call of the trail. And he understood that though Jasper had a home here, the day might come when the world beyond the fence would demand their attention again. For now, though they stayed, the ranch thrived, the town was safe, and the people who had once lived in fear now carried themselves with something close to pride. The fight with the black spurs had left its mark, but it had also given them back their voice. Clara often said that was Jasper's true gift, not the battles he'd fought but the courage he'd inspired. One night, months later, as a summer storm rolled in from the mountains, Eli stood in the doorway of the barn, listening to the rain on the roof. Jasper was inside chewing contentedly on a bucket of sweet grain, the garland from the wedding still hanging dried but intact from a beam above. Clara's voice called from the porch, warm against the sound of the storm, and Eli felt a quiet certainty settle in his chest. The West had taken much from him over the years. It had tested him, scarred him, and sent him wandering through more miles of dust than he could count. But it had also led him here to this land, this woman, this child, and this stubborn, extraordinary donkey. Whatever storms might come, they would face them together. And if the road ever called again, he knew Jasper would be ready, ears high, hooves steady, carrying them into whatever story waited beyond the horizon. Looking back on the journey of Eli Turner, Clara May, and Jasper the Gray Donkey, who defied every expectation, it is hard to separate truth from legend, and maybe that's the way it should be. Their story begins in the burning light of Tombstone, where a wandering cowboy with a guarded past rides into town on the back of a creature most men would overlook. That first image, a silent man and his intelligent, towering donkey moving through a town thick with dust and suspicion, set the tone for everything that followed. Eli was a man shaped by loss and the unforgiving roads of the West, and Jasper was more than just his mount. He was his partner, his equal in instinct and resilience. In Red Rock Canyon, their fates intertwined with Clara May, a woman carrying not just a child, but a burden of danger and defiance. The Black Spurs, ruthless, calculated, and driven by greed, saw her family's ranch as a prize, not only for its land but for the gold hidden beneath it. That day in the heat and echo of the canyon, Jasper proved himself more than a beast of burden. With speed, cunning, and a fearless charge, he broke the grip of armed men, giving Eli the space to act, and Clara the chance to escape. It was the first of many times Jasper's presence would turn the tide. Their path to Santa Fe was no straight line. Across the open plains and through rough, lawless towns like Dodge City, they faced hunger, thirst, and ambush. Each obstacle tested their endurance, forcing Eli and Clara to rely on one another in ways neither had planned. Around campfires and under cold starlight truths emerged of the land Eli had lost in the war of Clara's father's stubborn legacy, and of the gold that could either rebuild or destroy, depending on whose hands held it. Jasper, ever watchful, seemed to carry not only their weight, but the weight of their hopes, leading them to water when it was needed most, and into trouble only when there was no choice but to face it. By the time they reached Santa Fe, the Black Spurs had already laid claim to Clara's land through intimidation and false law. The town lived in a kind of quiet submission, its spirit stifled. But Eli knew the language of oppression, and he refused to let it stand. He gathered the willing old lawmen, neighboring ranchers, Pueblo allies, into a force that would turn the city's narrow streets into a weapon. The showdown that followed was not just a battle for one woman's home, but for the dignity of a town that had forgotten it could fight back. Calder Voss and his gang fell not through brute strength alone, but through the strategy of those who knew the land, the unity of those with something worth defending, and the unpredictable ferocity of one gray donkey who seemed to understand the stakes as well as any man. Victory brought more than safety. It brought the possibility of staying. For a man like Eli, whose life had been a string of roads without endings, the choice to remain was not made lightly. Yet the ranch, with its broken fences and empty pastures, called to him in a way no trail ever had. Working alongside Clara and the neighbors, he rebuilt not only the land, but his own sense of purpose. And when the cottonwoods bloomed by the river, he stood with Clara in the shade, Jasper beside them in a garland of wildflowers, and spoke vows that bound them more tightly than any blood oath from his days as a soldier. The ranch grew strong again. The town thrived. Jasper, now a local legend, spent his days in a green pasture, receiving apples from wide-eyed children who had heard of his bravery. Eli learned the quiet satisfaction of days measured not by the miles ridden, but by the work done, the fences mended, and the meals shared with family. Still, there were moments on the edge of evening when the sky stretched wide and gold, when Jasper would stand at the far fence, ears forward, staring into the distance. Eli understood. The road was part of them. One day, it might call again. The story of Eli, Clara, and Jasper is more than an adventure set in the Wild West. It is a portrait of resilience, trust, and the unexpected ways life offers second chances. It reminds us that allies can come in unlikely forms, that courage sometimes wears quiet faces, and that the strongest bonds are forged not in comfort, but in trial. From their journey, we can draw a lesson that holds true. Even far from the dust and gunsmoke of their time, life will put obstacles in your path that you cannot move alone. You will need others, friends, partners, even those you never expected to stand beside you. And when you find them, you must trust them as Eli trusted Jasper, and as Clara trusted Eli. Not every challenge will be a gunfight, but every challenge will demand some form of courage. It may be the courage to defend what is yours, to start over when the past has left you nothing, or to choose to stay when every instinct tells you to keep running. In our own lives, the black spurs may take the shape of debts, personal losses, failed ventures, or toxic influences. The strategy remains the same. Identify the threat, gather your allies, use the ground you stand on to your advantage, and never underestimate the quiet, steady forces that walk beside you. And perhaps, most importantly, remember that victory is not just the defeat of what you fear, it is the building of something worth protecting afterward. If you followed this story from the sunlit streets of Tombstone to the green pasture where Jasper now rests, you know that tales like this aren't just about the West. They're about all of us, in any time, in any place, learning that we can face down what hunts us and still choose to plant our feet and say, "Here, this is mine, I will keep it." Thank you for writing this trail with me. If you want to keep hearing stories that carry dust danger and the kind of hope you can hold in your hands, then I invite you to subscribe to this channel. Your support keeps the campfire burning and the stories coming so we can ride together into the next tale worth telling.